Why avoidance collapse after pushing empath into silence? Have you ever wondered what happens when an empath finally stops explaining, chasing, and fighting for someone who keeps pulling away? At first, the avoidant may feel relieved because the emotional pressure, conversations, and relationship demands suddenly disappear. They may believe they have finally regained their freedom and escaped the intensity they once felt. But what they often fail to realize is that the empath's silence is not a punishment. It is usually the moment when the empath's heart begins accepting that their efforts are no longer changing anything. For a long time, the empath may have been the person trying to repair conflicts, understand feelings, and maintain the connection. They may have sent messages, offered reassurance, and patiently waited for the avoidant to open up emotionally. The avoidant might have become comfortable with this pattern because they knew the empath would always return. They believed the connection would remain available no matter how distant they became. But something changes when the empath reaches emotional exhaustion and stops seeking validation. The silence of an empath can feel completely different from ordinary distance, because this time, the avoidant is not experiencing temporary space. They are experiencing the absence of someone who once provided emotional safety and constant attention. And this is where many avoidants begin facing emotions they previously avoided. The avoidant attachment style often involves protecting oneself from emotional vulnerability and uncomfortable feelings. When emotions become overwhelming, some avoidants create distance to regain a sense of control. They may convince themselves that needing someone is dangerous or that closeness will take away their independence. But when the empath finally becomes silent, that control can start disappearing. The avoidant no longer has the familiar emotional connection waiting in the background. They no longer receive the reassurance, patience, and understanding they secretly depended on. Suddenly, the person they pushed away becomes the person they start thinking about the most. They may begin replaying old memories and remembering moments they once took for granted. The peaceful silence that they wanted can slowly become a space filled with unanswered questions. They may wonder why the empath is no longer reaching out or trying to fix everything. They may start asking themselves if the relationship was more meaningful than they admitted. This is often the beginning of an internal emotional conflict for the avoidant. One part of them may still want distance because closeness feels uncomfortable. Another part may start missing the emotional connection they once had. This inner battle can create confusion because their actions and feelings may not match. They may want the empath near them, but still fear becoming emotionally vulnerable. They may miss the love and care but struggle with the responsibility that comes with intimacy. The empath's silence removes the distraction that allowed the avoidant to avoid deeper emotions. When the empath was constantly present, the avoidant could focus on feeling overwhelmed. But when the empath disappears emotionally, the avoidant may finally notice the emptiness. They may begin recognizing that the person they pushed away was not the problem. They may realize that the relationship was exposing their own fears about emotional closeness. The empath's silence becomes a mirror, showing the avoidant what they were running from. It reveals the feelings they buried beneath independence and emotional distance. For some avoidants, this realization can create a strong desire to reconnect. They may suddenly become more curious about the empath's life and emotional state. They may check social media, revisit old conversations, or look for signs of connection. They might start wondering if the empath has truly moved on. This fear of losing someone can become stronger than their fear of intimacy. However, missing someone does not always mean someone is ready to change. An avoidant may feel emotional pain after losing connection, but still struggle with vulnerability. They may return because they miss the comfort, not because they have healed their patterns. This is why understanding the difference between missing someone and building a healthy relationship is important. A genuine reconnection requires emotional awareness, communication, and willingness to grow. The empath's silence can create a powerful shift because the old relationship dynamic is no longer available. The avoidant can no longer rely on the empath carrying the emotional weight alone. The responsibility of creating connection now becomes something both people must share. This change can feel uncomfortable because the avoidant is forced to face their own emotional habits. They may begin questioning why they always withdraw when relationships become deeper. They may start noticing how their fear of vulnerability affected someone who truly cared. The collapse many avoidants experience is not always dramatic or visible from the outside. Sometimes it happens quietly through reflection, loneliness, and emotional realization. They may appear calm, while internally struggling with thoughts they cannot easily express. Many avoidants were taught that needing others makes them weak or dependent, so when they lose a deeply caring person, they may not immediately show sadness. Instead, they may process the loss privately and slowly. The empath's silence can become powerful because it removes the emotional safety net. The avoidant finally experiences what it feels like when someone stops chasing them. They may realize that the connection they assumed would always exist was actually something valuable. They may understand that love requires participation, not just receiving patience from another person. The empath also experiences a transformation during this silence. They begin rebuilding their confidence and reconnecting with their own emotional needs. They stop measuring their worth by how much they can tolerate from someone else. They start choosing peace over constantly trying to prove their love. And this personal growth can be the moment when the entire relationship dynamic changes. The avoidant may notice that the empath is no longer waiting in the same emotional position. The person who once chased them now appears stronger, calmer, and more independent. This can create a powerful realization that the empath was never desperate for them. The empath was simply trying to love someone who was afraid of receiving love. When that effort disappears, the avoidant may finally understand what they had. But the most important lesson is that silence should not be used as a manipulation strategy. Healthy silence is not about making someone panic or forcing them to come back. Healthy silence is about protecting your emotional energy and creating space for healing. When an empath stops chasing, they are not losing power. They are returning that power back to themselves. And sometimes, the greatest impact you can have on someone is simply allowing them to experience your absence. Because when someone loses constant access to your love, they may finally understand its value. The avoidant may collapse, not because the empath tried to hurt them. They may collapse because the emotional support they ignored is no longer available. And that moment can become a turning point where they either grow emotionally or continue repeating the same patterns. The silence of an empath does not destroy a connection. Sometimes, it reveals the truth about whether both people were willing to protect it. Because real love cannot survive through chasing, distancing, and emotional confusion forever. A healthy relationship requires two people who are willing to show up, communicate, and create emotional safety together. So if you are an empath who has finally chosen silence after endless effort, remember this: your silence is not a weapon. Your silence is a message that your heart deserves to be heard too. And sometimes, the person who ran away from your love finally understands its importance when they no longer feel it around them.